Good morning on this Wednesday, January 12th, 2022, and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. Dozens of Black authors whose works are being pulled from school libraries under the pretext that they are teaching critical race theory, although most of the books that are targeted for bans don't teach critical race theory but are written by and about people of color. The American Library Association said its Office for Intellectual Freedom reported 273 books were affected by censorship attempts in 2020, many with content that highlighted race, gender, and sexuality. And since September alone, there have been at least 230 challenges, the organization says. We discussed that this morning with our special guest, author Celeste Headlee, also Oseye Boyd of the Indianapolis Recorder, and James Wright of the Washington Informer. In fact, let's bring on right now Oseye Boyd and James Wright as we go through the headlines for this morning. Good morning, Oseye and James.
Good morning.
Good to have you as always. But first, before we get to the news topics, we have some internal breaking news. There has been a change because of the Omicron variant that is spreading rapidly across the country and the travel involved. The National Newspaper Publishers Association has announced this morning that it is postponing its midwinter conference that was scheduled to begin January 19th, and it's simply for the safety of the publishers who are traveling from all over the country. And the virus has really taken on a new life now. So for the health and safety of all who were planning to travel, the NNPA will postpone it. We will announce soon a new date for that conference. So hold on, and we are asking our special guest, Stephanie Mills, to hold on. She's been a trooper. She's a big supporter of the Black press, so we expect her to join us when we do resume that conference. But right now, the news headlines this morning: famous author and noted civil rights leader Maya Angelou became the first African-American woman featured on the 25-cent coin. The U.S. Mint began shipping the quarters on January 10th. Reportedly, the Angelou coin is the first in a series designed to celebrate the accomplishment of American women. Each time we redesign our currency, we have the chance to say something about our country, what we value, and how we've progressed as a society. Those are the words of Janet Yellen, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, Treasury Secretary. She says, "I'm very proud that these coins celebrate the contributions of some of America's most remarkable women, including Maya Angelou." I think it's big news there, Oseye.
It's awesome news. That is amazing news. And what a great first person to tribute. So awesome. I didn't even know about this. I didn't even know. Somehow I missed it. Been focused on the $2.
This is what we're here for, Oseye. And we know Maya Angelou's works, James, include such classics as "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings" and "Still I Rise" and "The Heart of a Woman." She died in 2014, but not before she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, from President Barack Obama. The new coin features Maya Angelou with her arms uplifted, a bird in flight, and a rising sun behind her. Maya Angelou, yeah, how about that? How about that?
Well, you know, I know Oprah is happy about it, so if Oprah's happy, I'm happy.
Really? I don't know about that, James. I don't know if my happiness relates in any way relates to Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey got enough money to buy happiness for the next 200 years. I ain't worried about Oprah's happiness.
Well, I'll just add this really quickly as we get into the next segment, but her book will be targeted. So
there you go. There you go.
Her book will be targeted. So
there you go. And we're going to talk about that in a few moments with our special guest. But also in the news this morning, prayer breakfasts, marches, parades, and an uptick in volunteer efforts to support the annual day of service have remained staples of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. but the late civil rights icon family has asked that observers strike a different tune in 2022. King's family has requested no celebration unless federal lawmakers pass voting rights legislation, a task that appears out of reach as President Joe Biden and several Democrats have faced stiff Republican opposition. Democrats have also, James, been hampered by members of their own party, notably West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, whose vote is crucial in an evenly split chamber. Are they going to get this done? Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said that they will have a vote by Martin Luther King Day, which is Monday, on the filibuster and voting rights. I just don't see it, James. Do you?
I don't see it either. What I do see is a whole lot of discussion around this voting rights and voter suppression. And, you know, the president has got to be the president. He has the power to put pressure on Joe Manchin in terms of being able to deliver resources and grants and things like that in order to get things done, as well as fundraising prowess. So we need the president to really step up for voting rights.
Well, in a statement, Martin Luther King III, the eldest son of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, says, "We will not accept empty promises in pursuit of my father's dream for a more equal and just America." They are demanding that this legislation get done. As in a conversation I had with the chair of the National Newspaper Publicists Association yesterday, Karen Carter Richards, she said, "Get it done." And so they need to get it done. And I'm sure, Oshia, you see it the same way.
Yeah, I like this flex from his family. I really do. I think they probably could have been flexing all along to actually put pressure on legislators to actually make things happen. We should even be here today. This should have happened a long time ago. So it's disappointing that we're still here arguing about the same thing. But I really like seeing his family come out and put their foot down.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that we've come to this moment, as you said, and I keep harking back to this, and it's something that we are writing about as well. But I keep harking back to this, that in the 1960s, what year, James, the historian, 1965, when President Johnson got the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act passed?
Yes, it was 1965, and it was based on the activities of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And that was just the event that the president and the civil rights community needed in order to get it past both the House and the Senate that year.
Well, and so you think about it under those circumstances, right? And I said it, and please understand the context. In 1965, there was still this idea that you can call a black man boy. There was still this idea that you can call black people niggers. There was still this idea that you can lynch black people. There was still so much going on. The struggle was far from over, the civil rights struggle, yet they got civil rights passed, right?
That's right.
And they got voting rights passed. Now, today, they're trying to get civil rights passed in the form of George Floyd Justice and Police Act, and they're trying to get voting rights passed in 2022. You would think, so James and Oshia, that it would be a little bit easier today. Why not?
Well, the problem with the Senate is that you have some moderate Republicans such as Susan Collins and Mitt Romney, Rob Portman, and even a persuadable, I would say, Tim Scott out of South Carolina, who know what is right, and they're Republicans, but they don't want to do the right thing because they don't want to offend Mitch McConnell. That would have been unthinkable maybe about 20 years ago when senators were independent and they thought about doing what was right and based on what their states want and not just what one man wants. But in terms of the Democrats, they're almost locked up except for Senator of Arizona, and she's coming around, what I'm hearing, and Joe Manchin. But Joe Manchin wouldn't even be an issue on this because civil rights was just something that the Democratic Party, since Lyndon Johnson, has just supported.
Well, Oshia, I'm just going to ask this question, then we'll move on, and I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Is this president strong enough? I won't frame it the other way. The other way was the ask. I guess I will frame it. Is he just too weak?
I'm going to go with yes. I'm going to go with yes. I think they're all too weak, or we would have had this done a long time ago. It's about priorities. It's about priorities, and this is not a priority. I don't think. If it happens, I will be amazed. I will come back and I will eat my words and say he was not too weak. But I think it's about priorities, and this is not on the high list of priorities.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to take that back. I'm going to say this too, James, that I like what Oseye just said, priorities, right? And perhaps too, Biden has been in politics. President Biden has been in politics forever. Is it just his time has passed?
Well, here's what I believe is going on. Biden may have been in too long. It's interesting that you have had governors who have become president and they were able to move legislation because they're used to dealing with legislators. It's on the state level, but legislators. But Biden has been in the Senate and he's too wedded to the Senate and he's too wedded to its the way it operates. And sometimes you need an outsider in that presidential position in order to get things done. Lyndon Johnson as the exception. But my point is that I think that he's growing into the office, considering who he succeeded in that office. But he has got to get the Democratic Party behind his priorities, behind voting rights, behind him passing that George Floyd bill, or his administration will be a wash.
Well, we will see. Again, Senator Schumer said that a vote will take place by Monday on both the filibuster and voting rights in the Senate. So we will see. Celeste Hart writes in. She says about Maya Angelou and banned books. She says, I know why the Cage Bird Sing was banned in schools in North Carolina, her home state. Well, that's what we're discussing this morning. Black authors are being banned. Their work is being banned. They're calling it critical race theory. We now bring on Celeste Headlee, who is the author of Speaking of Race. She's also the co-host of the weekly series Retro Report on PBS. Good morning, Celeste.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's a pleasure to have you. First and foremost, congratulations on the new book. Before we get into this, let's tell us just a little bit about the book and what it took to put it together.
So this book is how to get through the conversation about race. It's meant to sort of diffuse some of the apprehension people feel, not only people of color, but white people as well, about talking about this, by just walking you through it. The best science we have, the best psychology that we have to get you through this conversation without getting into an argument and maybe make a tiny little bit of progress. So this isn't a book that's going to give you history. It's not going to tell you why you shouldn't touch my hair. It's going to tell you how to get through that conversation after that bad thing has happened, or after you just have you're curious about something connected to race. So it kind of fills that little gap that was missing.
Yeah, and so we're seeing, Celeste, that Black authors are being banned. Their work is being banned in schools and other institutions. Now, you had an experience too that you shared with us before we went on about your book. When it comes, Speaking of Race is the name of the book. Share that with our audience as well.
Yeah, one of the publishers that we first offered it to before we went to HarperCollins said, we have enough books on race. we don't need to add another book on race. This topic is covered for us, which was very surprising considering the fact that we were offering it in the summer of 2020. We all know what was happening back then. So yeah, and I also think it's interesting. You were talking about the Maya Angelou quarter, and your listeners, your watchers, absolutely right. Maya Angelou for quite some time was called the most banned author in America. I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings was banned a bunch of times, and we're talking about an author who won a National Book Awards and a Pulitzer Prize and an Emmy. And her book was banned again and again and again. In fact, in one particular case, they said that it caused bitterness and rage in young children, and that's why they didn't want kids reading it. So, I mean, what hope do the rest of us have if Maya Angelou, Pulitzer Prize winning Maya Angelou, is called bitter?
Yeah.
It caused bitterness and hatred against whites. That was at one point the justification for banning her. And so here we are again, right? And everything old is new again. This isn't like, oh, they're suddenly out of nowhere banning Black authors. This has happened again and again. You almost can't get through a decade in the United States history without seeing Black authors being banned.
Yeah, Oseye and James, among the books recently banned from schools in Texas, in particular, was the book. It tells us Black boys who experience racism in schools, and they were banned from school libraries. I can't think of the author's name. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm got a brain cramp. But anyway. The author said he was shocked that his books were banned. He says, apparently I'm teaching critical race theory, and confused parents wrote about the ban. They cited the decades-old academic and legal framework that teaches about racism in America. Basically, what is critical race theory?
Pretty much anything has to do with Black people.
That's what it sounds like.
That's what it's come. Anytime you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and race, that is what critical race theory has now become. So whenever you bring up race, people have attached critical race theory to it. Even though we've been doing DEI for a while, no one heard of critical race theory until last year.
Yeah, the author is Jerry Craft. I'm sorry about that brain cramp there, but James, we're seeing just whatever, like Oseye just said, it doesn't matter if it's about race in any way, if it's about Black people, if it's about Black history in any way, it's classified as critical race theory.
I mean, that's the silliest thing I have ever heard. Critical race theory isn't even taught at the elementary and high school level. It's mainly a college thing. But I mean, come on, you're going to sit up here and you're going to ban Beloved by Toni Morrison, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and then Ruby Bridges, This Is Your Time. I mean, you're going to ban books like that? I mean, that is just crazy. What the purpose of reading books, a diversity of books, is to teach students how to think critically and read critical material and being able to parse exactly what is going on in the book and what it says about our larger society. What are they going to do now, Stacy? Ban Sally, Dick, and Jane? But hey, I know a good book that's good, that the one that these folks like. Maybe it's Up From Slavery from Booker T. Washington, or maybe the autobiography, I should say, of Clarence Thomas, or maybe Thomas Sowell's books on his personal journey, how he was picked up by Hoover Institute economists and rubbed his head and said, "I like you."
You know, they call Celeste Headlee the light-skinned Black Jew. Celeste, most of the books that are targeted for ban, they don't teach critical race theory, but are written by and about people of color. Again, I just want to hear your feedback on that. You went through the whole process, and you experienced some of this as well, as you well stated. It's a tough process, right, as an author, to get a book together in the first place.
Yeah, and let me say a couple things here. I mean, first of all, it's not elementary school kids that are studying critical race theory. I got all the way through college and graduate studies without studying critical race theory. Almost no one is taking a class in critical race theory. They're great classes, but almost nobody has to take those classes. A. B, yes. And I just want to touch on this idea of who's a Black author, right? Because you can see how light my skin is. But the thing of it is, as soon as I tell people that I'm Black, that's it. As far as people are concerned, I'm Black for the rest of my life. And that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. Like, that's who I grew up with. That's my family. But like, I'm a Black author. and now that I've written a book about race, I will be first and foremost in people's minds. You know, my grandfather was William Grant Still, the dean of Black composers, and they always introduce him as a Black composer. And I always say to myself, I mean, do we introduce Gershwin as a Jewish composer? Like, why does the identifier always have to be there? Can he not ever be just a composer? And it's
just a great composer, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing with Black authors. Like, as James was saying, some of these books aren't about race. They're just, and I wanted to read this bit of a statement from the American Library Association. I'm sorry, I'm getting all heat up about this. The American Library Association said, and I'm going to quote them directly. They said, in recent months, a few organizations have advanced the proposition that the voices of the marginalized have no place on library shelves, falsely claiming that these works are subversive, immoral, or worse. These groups induce elected and non-elected officials to abandon constitutional principles, ignore the rule of law, and disregard individual rights to promote government censorship of library collections. The voice of the marginalized have no place on library shelves. We're not even talking about books like mine that actually literally deal with race. We're talking about anything that is written by somebody who's Black, regardless of how dark that skin is.
So what's the solution here, Oseye? What's the solution?
The solution, I'm not one for banning books. I'm not one for censoring books. I believe the solution is to actually let librarians do their jobs. Librarians actually go to school. They learn how to pick out books that are age appropriate. If your child is getting a book that you don't think is appropriate, that's a conversation for you and your child. I think a lot of parents here don't want to parent. They want the schools to parent for them. They're saying it's about protecting their children, but that's what your job is as a parent, to come and say, okay, this is why I don't think this book is appropriate for you. Because who's to say that book is not appropriate for another child? And if you're talking about just anything that has to do with Black people, then that's a whole lot of books here. We're talking about Maya Angelou. James mentioned Toni Morrison. She's been targeted too, as you know, at one point. So a lot of great books that just happen to talk about Black people, or just people and are written by a Black person, are now targeted. And to Celeste's point, is basically we don't want anyone thinking about Black people at all, because we're not mainstream, and that's quite disgusting when you really think about it.
Yeah, and we you know, earlier we were talking about in the news topics about voting rights and civil rights, and this is, again, it's like we're in 2022 and yet we're 1962 all over again, right? It's pretty amazing, James, what's going on in this country.
Well, if you want to go back further, you're talking about the 1960s. You want to go back further in Europe, we're talking about 1930s Nazi Germany. They started banning books and they burned books, among other activities, in order to curtail the Jewish voice. And we all know what happened in the 1940s in terms of that. We have to put a stop to this nonsense. And I agree with Ms. Boyd. People really have to step up and be parents and let the librarians do their job and not let let this go on. One quick point I want to make. It really upsets me that the right wingers are attacking and talking about banning books, when what they need to be doing, they need to be going to these school board meetings and looking at these budgets and looking at these Board of Education members and these high-level administrators spending people's money crazy and not focusing on the classroom, but going to these luxurious conferences on the taxpayers' dime, and the taxpayers aren't seeing any results of going to these conferences.
Yeah, well, and again, I go back to, and I love Celeste's response. You know, as we think about authors, and particularly authors of color, there is a whole lot that goes into not only collecting and writing the book, but also getting a publisher, getting an agent. Celeste, and I'm sure you could talk about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the odds are stacked against Black authors, and very often what you want to write is not what they want to hear from you. You know, and my grandfather came up against the very same thing, right? Either they don't want you talking about race in any way, shape, or form, or That's all they want you to talk about. He had critics telling him, why doesn't he write more Negroid music and stay in his lane? In other words, like it's sort of the same complaint when every time an athlete speaks up about civil rights, just play the game, right? There's always people trying to police the way that people of color act, police what we can say, police how we can express ourselves. And that is the same that's true when you're trying to get a book published, right? And so the odds, and we know statistically speaking that it is much more difficult for a person of color, especially a woman of color, to get an agent and then get a book published. And when she does get that book published, she's probably going to get a much lower advance and a lot less invested into marketing that book than other writers, especially white males. So yeah, getting that book on the shelves is a struggle. And then to have people suddenly ban it, I mean, it's just insult piled on injury.
Yeah, I think we have our president and CEO, Dr. Benjamin Chavis, with us. Dr. Chavis, have you joined? Yes, and there he is, the well-traveled Dr. Ben Chavis. Dr. Chavis,
thank you.
I thought maybe you wanted to weigh in a little bit before we do close out on this topic of banning books, banning Black books.
Well, I don't think any books should be banned, and particularly books that are written by Black authors and other authors of color. I think that, first of all, I want to congratulate Celeste on her success with her book, a very important book, very timely book. I think we need to, we represent the Black press. We need to publish more. I want the NMPA to establish its own publishing house so that we can publish these authors without taking through all the changes that the mainstream publishing industry does. It is a struggle to get the truth out. And I think this whole thing about critical race theory is a diversion. I remember years ago, they came up with a thing called reverse racism. Every time a Black person said something about it, oh, you're just a reverse racist. See, it's almost a denial of people in power, that people who don't have power to take away their voice, take away their right to articulate. That's why during this year, Stacey, this is the 195th year of the Black Press of America. We have to plead our own cause. And we plead our own cause by publishing our own newspapers, by writing our own books, by raising up a generation of thinkers. And I think studies have shown that young people today are less prejudiced than their foreparents. And I think at a time with the browning of America, we need more books, not less books, that are written by persons of color. If we're ever going to have a full democracy, we got to start treating each other fairly and equitably in the publishing world, as well as the economic world, the spiritual world, the culture world. All these things intersect. So I think this is a discussion that's well timed, and I commend all of the authors out there, including you, Stacey. You're an author. How the struggle it is to get published and then get distributed, because we need our own distribution. That's another thing. You can have a great book, but if it's not on the, if you walk through the airport and can't see your book, why? It's because the distributors also discriminate.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Chavis, I go to you and say this, Dr. Chavis. I'll leave this in your lap as the president and CEO of the NMPA. How about the NMPA starting its own publishing arm?
Yes. Well, you heard it first right here on Let It Be Known.
There you go. And so I want to go back quickly to Celeste Headlee. Celeste, the author of Speaking of Race. Celeste, where can we find your book? And just give us a short synopsis as we close about the importance of Speaking of Race, your new book.
If we aren't talking to other people about race, that's what makes us think that race is a shameful topic to talk about. When you avoid a topic, it gets associated with shame or some kind of scandal. We need to make it open. We need to make it normalized. 5-minute conversations about race, 10-minute. We need to remove that fear of this topic so that it doesn't become something that's only talked about in whispers when Black people aren't present, right? The more we talk about it, the more normalized it becomes, the more we find solutions.
Celeste Headlee, the author of Speaking of Race. We really appreciate you joining the Black Press this morning. It's a privilege to have you. And of course, James Wright of the Washington Informer and a regular contributor of Let It Be Known. We appreciate James. And Oseye Boyd is always great having Oseye. Oseye knows when to crack the whip. And so we always try to be on our best behavior when Oseye shows up. So we thank you so much. And remember to, as we said at the top, Dr. Chavis, our president, has announced that the Midwinter Conference, the NMPA's Midwinter Conference, will be postponed to a later date. Stay tuned for that later date. We will hope to bring you that soon. Again, it's for the health and safety of all that we have decided, or the powers that be at the NMPA, they have decided that we should put it off just a little while. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.